Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and today I've got all four of the brand new Outlaws of Thunder Junction Commander decks, and I want to open them up, tell you some stories about their design, and yeah, just hang out, have a good time. Let's talk about the set. So I'm going to set these other three aside, and we will begin right here with Most Wanted. Now, lead designer for these decks was Corey Bowen. I think a lot of people think that I make all the Commander stuff at Wizards. That's very much not true. We have a great team of people that work on them, and Corey designed these decks. So I know some of the stories. I worked with Corey on them to some degree. Here's the back of the box, by the way, for anyone curious. And I've also talked with Corey some about this product too. So I mean, I know the details of what's going on, but you know, there might be a few places where I'm like, I actually don't remember as much about this card, but I know a lot about it and can tell you all kinds of stories. And hats off to Corey for getting his set out the door. Corey was lead designer of sets like Commander Legends Battle at Baldur's Gate, the Strixhaven Commander decks, a bunch of others too. He's done so many Commander decks. Yeah, so you get these little punch-out counters on the inside. One fun fact about design is, in the process, late on, I know we're already at the counters I'm talking, but in the process late on, we get a message of like, hey, what counters does your deck use? What punch-out counters do you want in your decks? So we actually help choose what these are. This deck wants these and these +1/+1 counters. So there you go. Okay, now a couple unusual things. I guess I'll start with the usual thing. A usual thing is right here, which is we hear a little bit about the characters. We can learn about Olivia, Opulent Outlaw, the face commander of this deck. A bit of story here. I'm not going to read it to you in any kind of dramatic storytelling voice, although I'd love to say something like, enraged by her ruined wedding and failed attempt to usurp all vampiric power on her home plane, and go on, but we have a lot of decks to get through. But then on the back, you get both some tips about playing the deck, which we also help write, by the way. I think a lot of people don't even pull this thing out and look at it, but we put time into just helping people understand, here's some basics for playing this deck if you've never tried it before, so give that a roll, you know. But the unusual thing this time around, and I've got a video coming out later this week talking about this, is are these. Oh, well, actually, that's not where I thought it was going to be. Can you tell I've never opened up Outlaws of Thunder Junction deck before? Well, you know, I'm not going to cut that. We're just doing it live. You're going to see what it's like for me to open up a product for the first time. I don't know where the things are. I guess they're in here. Okay, the things that are normal, you get a deck box. It fits your deck. Hooray. Wonderful. Gotta love that. Whew, right out of the box, deck box. You get this Collector Booster sample pack, where you get some couple cards from the set. Let's see what we got. Little Collector Booster sample. We got a Caustic Bronto. Ooh, and a Foil Humiliate. Just a little sample in there. Okay, but now I've built up this drama twice, I think, but it's really time. It's really time now. I want to talk about something unusual you'll find in these precons. Now, there's a little strip here. If I find it, I can pull on. Let's see if I'm talented enough today. Nope. I guess I'm not talented enough today. There we are. Wow, we're really starting off this one with a bang. Everyone out there who's new to this watching is like, Gavin, what are you doing? You're the guy that makes Magic cards? Yes. Yes, proudly and truly. Okay, but really, where are they? They're right here at the back. Okay, so every one of these decks contains some of these bounties. Now, this is for a little mini game. You can play with these decks optionally. You don't have to do it if you want to. I've got a video talking about kind of how it came to be later this week. You'll be able to see all about. But here are the rules on the back. I'm not going to go into it all how it works. But basically, when you buy all the precon decks, you put all the bounties in a pile, and you get to kind of have this little bounty mini game that takes place where these cards are accumulating bounties. And when you meet their condition, like for example, at the beginning of your end step, if a legendary creature you controlled attacked alone this turn, you collect a reward. So there's just kind of a little mini game you can play. You don't have to play. It's optional. There's no cards that reference it. But all the cards do have bespoke art, by the way. So this is one of my favorites, Squeakers the Sly. You want to find out what's going on with this guy? I'm certainly curious what's going on with Squeakers. But anyway, all these decks will have these in there. I just want to call that out to start with. I think it's kind of cool. Okay, let's go through the cards. So starting with the deck theme. So red, white, black. From the very beginning, I know Corey knew he wanted an outlaw deck. Kind of like the party deck that I made in Battle for Baldur's Gate. I was lead designer of those commander decks. Corey was the lead designer of the main set. It's just super fun to go back in Magic history and find all kinds of like weird old things that are outlaws. The same way it was for me to find funny old creatures that had party mechanic. So Corey made this outlaw deck, and as we see as we go through this, there's all kinds of wacky callbacks to the past, and also a bit of a treasure theme because of course outlaws love accumulating treasure. That makes sense. Olivia is a character that we were told was on this plane, and it's like, well, let's make sure she's on the face of a commander deck. People love Olivia. One thing that's often missed with this commander, or this wording on this commander, is whenever one more Outlaws you control deal combat damage to a player, that triggers once per player. So if you attack 3 players, you will get 3 treasures, which certainly helps supercharge this other ability right here. So yeah, other than that, this card just makes a ton of treasure and then lets you bump up your whole team, which is kind of cool. Corey's makes all kinds of fun backup commanders. He made Bernard, the Golem commander, if you remember him. And this is his newest wacky take on making all your treasures into creatures. So if you're accumulating all these treasures, I mean, you could use them for mana, but boring. Attack your opponents to death. Turns your Dockside Extortions into a win condition. This is going to be a fun one to kind of build around. So yeah, that's it. Because they're all hasty, they're all Outlaws. And yeah. Usually with the backup commanders, our goal is to send you in a bit of a different direction but while still working with the rest of the deck, right? So this is a card that works great in this deck. It just gives all your Outlaws Vigilance and Haste. You got a bunch of treasure creating cards. It creates you a bunch of extra Outlaws, but it plays so differently from Olivia, right? We don't just want another kind of Olivia-ish card as the backup commander. We want something that's going to play quite a bit differently. All right, then we got some reprints. We got Council's Judgment, Helad's Intervention. Here's a new card, Angelic Sellsword. All right, so there are these mercenary tokens in the main set that pump up your creatures, and we wanted to make sure that was represented a little bit here in the commander deck with a new card or two that made them. I know that Corey was also excited about making an Angel Mercenary, so that was kind of cool. And yeah, if this gets big enough, you can draw a card along your way. We ride at dawn. So one fun thing about Commander is being able to reach back into the past for some one-off mechanics. Now, we've started doing this more in main sets recently, so it's not the only place that you'll see this happening, but in Commander especially is where we often do that. And so giving all your legendary creatures Convoke is a pretty neat throwback. And then once you get another card that makes these mercenary tokens. So there's Massacre Girl, Feign the Broker, an Outlaw, Massacre Girl, an Outlaw, right? So once again, fun to kind of find this who's who, a Warlock right here. Nighthawk Scavenger, this is also key in the party deck and in Baldur's Gate. Removal spells, the Misfortune Teller. This is from New Capenna, a little known card. So once again, a fun one to kind of go back and find. Camber the Plunderer, a card that Corey made in the past, so it's always cool when you can throw forward to yourself. Hex, one of my favorites. You gotta have 6 creatures in play to cast it, but you know, it's pretty easy to do. It's not the strongest board wipe necessarily, but when you get to just sweep an entire opponent's board and then attack them, it's pretty meaningful. One thing we try and do is in these decks that are all about building up creatures, so like getting really wide boards, we want the board wipes to not try and get rid of your own stuff because your decks are often really soft to board wipes. So we'll try something more like a Hex where it hits your opponent's stuff. Maybe a little weaker than a full-on board sweeper, but doesn't ruin your entire board along the way. Another card, oh no, I think Chris Mooney made this card, but Marie the Killing Quill. The Assassin's Mercenary Rogue Lord, finally coming in handy here, and Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Okay, here's another card, Discreet Retreat. I think this card was called Outlaws Hideout or something in design. I remember me and Corey had a lot of discussions about this card because it was a little weird to me to have a card that is basically like an enchantment that's on the battlefield that that has like a very enchantment-y effect. Whenever you cast your first Outlaw spell each turn, you draw a card and lose a life. So it's sort of like a Phyrexian Arena kind of card or something, whatever, a Vanquisher's Banner. But it's hidden under one of your lands. So I just like, hey, this is a permanent that should be in play that people like can see and interact with, not like hidden back here in your land row. But Corey loved, understandably, the flavor of it being a kind of Outlaws Hideout, a place where people stuck. And sort of after a bunch of conversation, what we came to is, let's give it something that makes the land matter. So, in this case, with the Discreet Retreat, it can tap for 2 mana. That's why you enchant the land. It's not just like, if without this, it'd be kind of weird to be hanging out on your land. But with this, it really makes it feel like a whole package. Here's why it's an enchant land. Right, it gives you 2 mana for your Outlaws. So it just accelerates you a little bit and lets you do this other cool thing. Shard Grave Robber, featuring another returning mechanic, Escape. It's so cool just to have, the word escape on an Outlaw. It makes so much sense. Often these kind of decks in Commander just have trouble going long because a board wipe or 2 really takes them out. So ways to rebuild with cards out of the graveyard is really nice. So yeah, that's kind of the role this is serving here. Another card serving that same role, right? Your opponent sweeps the board and you're like, actually, I'll get them all back. They're all back in town today. Pretty efficient rate on a reanimation spell here. So if you just gotta have enough Outlaws. Cool reprint, a Warlock. Once again, just a real who's who of stuff. Direfleet Ravager. This card can really come down and slice up games. I also had this in the party deck in Baldur's Gate. I remember the games where you draw this just feel so different than the games where you don't. Mirror Entity, a classic typal kind of reward there. Some pirates. I think this card is underplayed. I enjoy Seize the Spotlight. You know, people usually have good creatures to take, or let you draw cards and make treasure. So if the result of this is you draw 2 cards, make 2 treasure, and take a creature for a turn, you know, it's a pretty decent red card. Grenzo and Grass Marauders. This is kind of a wild pirate too. 7 mana 4/4 pirate. Don't think about a lot of pirates being that large, but it's your opponent for a bunch. Reign of Riches. Love this card. This showed up in New Capenna. Those decks I think massively underrated, by the way. There's so much cool stuff in those New Capenna decks. And yeah, it just gives your stuff a cascade with treasure, and you're gonna have plenty of treasure lying around, so pretty easy to do. There's the other half of Camber. Here's a new one, Dead Before Sunrise. The playtest name for this, for a long time, which I loved, although I know why we didn't make it, was it was something like Shootout at High Moon, not Noon, Moon, because there's a moon in the art right here. So Shootout at High Moon. I don't know. That was funny to me. Anyway, this lets all your outlaws deal with your opponent's creatures. You get to fire them all down, give all your outlaws +1/+0, and deal with all your opponent's creatures. Once again, kind of a one-sided board wipe in a way. The fact that it's an instant lets you do some pretty tricky stuff, right? You cast this end of turn, clear out their whole board, and then attack them. Or after some creatures have taken damage in combat, you can cast this. So kind of a neat little instant speed wrath trick there. Encore is such a fun little ability. I made a card kind of like this in Brothers War Commander, where it gives all your stuff Encore out of the graveyard. Well, I guess that's where you would be encoring from. But anyway, it gives all your stuff Encore. You know, you make a token for each of your opponents, which can really pile up. We've got like an ETB ability or something like that on one of these outlaws. So on a 4 mana 4/4 body, a lot better than the 6 mana 6/5 Fear or whatever I made in that set. Yeah, this card really hits. Another cool card from the Capenna decks. Brina. Who knew Brina was an outlaw? There you go. Queen Marchesa, Long May She Reign, Idol of Oblivion, Cat Manufacturer, Bounty Board. So Corey, you know, we talked about the bounty minigame earlier, but he loved the idea of a bounty board, right? It just feels so resonant for the space we were playing in. So we ended up making a card here too, and it plays well with a handful of other bounty cards like Mathis, which is in Commander 2017, and some others. So I think Chevelle uses this too. So if you are playing a bounty deck with one of those commanders, this card fits right on in. Kind of a cool little throwback there. Then we got a bunch of lands, a lot of the usual suspects you would expect here. Let's kind of bop through these. Check out this art on Desolate Mire. This is new for this set, so get that little theming in there, right? So these were introduced in the Fallout Commander decks, and now they're already back here in Outlaws of Thunder Junction Commander. Basically, our philosophy was we would introduce them in Fallout, and then we'd just be able to use them everywhere else. We wanted to unlock this cycle for our Commander decks, so you'll be seeing these show up as often as we want to, basically. So just calling out a fun little new thing there. Oh, look, Miss Meadow Skull, classic outlaw right here. Some cards from the main set. We got Requisition Raid, Changeling Outcast, of course. Another one mana Changeling. You know, not a ton of those. This is another nice reboot from the main set. Strike target non-outlaw. It just feels so flavorful, right? It kills anything that's not yours. Lightning Greaves protect your stuff. Here's new art for Impulsive Pilferer. So one thing we do is when we bring cards that when we bring cards back, it's cool to like retheme them sometimes. This one is from Commander Legends, originally, the first Commander Legends. And now it's back here with some brand new art, which is pretty cool. Shiny Impetus, Hubble Defector, Glittering Stockpile, Arcane Signet, Trailblazers Boosters. Here's a card from the main set that cares about committing crimes. So it's always fun. We do pass it through the main set and try and find a few cards to get in there where possible. If nothing fits, no worries. We don't shoehorn them in. And it is tricky because the main set cards are changing and changing and changing. So sometimes, like, you know, there just won't be anything good to put in. But, you know, with a set like this with Outlaw deck, you're going to find at least a few options. So here's something cool. We're trying out an experiment where we are refacing some iconic cards in Commander decks, such as Soul Ring. So you'll see more of this in the future. And yeah, all of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction Commander decks get this brand new looking Soul Ring. We know players love customizing their decks. They love, you know, finding their favorite Soul Ring art to use. So why not put a new one in our deck? So you can look forward to this one here and more Soul Rings in the future. Not unlike how our Universes Beyond decks do. We don't want Universes Beyond to have all the fun. We want to be able to do some cool stuff here, and then some more lands. You use them to cast your spells. I recommend it. And there we go. There is the Most Wanted deck. So that's this. Which deck should I do next? I'll set this one over to the side. Which deck should I do next? Let's go ahead and grab this one. It's Grand Larceny time, everyone. This is one that when Corey told me the theme originally, I was a little skeptical. Now, it didn't, like I say, it didn't sound like a cool theme. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is, taking people's stuff is just not very fun in Commander. People just don't enjoy when you take their stuff from them. Look at all these. See, this one's a little different. It's all +1/+1 counters. So there's little Planeswalker icons before. So little different punch-out counters here. And because people just don't like when you take their stuff from them. I've tried this in the past. I've tried building this kind of deck in the past. I didn't mention this before, but you get this little life wheel in all of these that track your life points, 40 to 0. And so, all right, I'll open the sample pack and I'll keep telling the story. I just want to see what we get. What do we get? Woo! We got Kellen Joins Up, little fun one here. Plots a card and a foil. Back for more. Okay, so the reason why I'm skeptical, so I've tried this kind of deck theme before, and it never works out. People really don't like it when you take their stuff from them, But, it makes a lot of sense for this set to have a way to take your opponent's stuff. So what Corey kind of settled on is instead of, stealing from the battlefield, which is where people feel the worst about you taking their stuff, you steal from the top of their library. You'd steal from their graveyard. You'd steal from places that don't feel as bad. I think there's still maybe a couple ways to take from the battlefield that ended up in the deck, but for the most part, it's you still get the cool stealing vibe without stealing stuff that people put into play, which is usually not the most fun. So it's a good way to kind of thread that needle. Good work, Corey. Here's a bit of story about playing the deck, how you do it, along with backup commander, Felix 5 Boots. Not going to read it all out to you. And then there's some info on Gonti and what he's doing here. Why would Gonti come here? Well, he's got a crime lord. He wants to come check out all the crimes. That makes sense. All right. Let's open this guy up. So yeah, we'll keep a count. We'll kind of look as we go through here, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Where even though it's a stealing deck and ostensibly feels very stealing-y, I'm just going to crack it from the top. It's easier than trying to find that pull strip. That's the point I'm at right now. It feels very stealing-y. It's not grabbing from your opponent's battlefield as much. The other thing, of course, I asked Corey a bunch about is why green, right? Blue-black stealing, of course. Why green? And it always came back to Villainous Wealth. There were other reasons too, but just Villainous Wealth is such a beloved card. We wanted to make a commander deck kind of for Villainous Wealth. So it's a funny way to kind of back engineer it. So it's definitely a little more blue-black than green, but there's some green stuff in here that they'll care about. So yeah, Gonti makes your spells that you don't own, but you're casting cost 1 less. And then once you steal the tops of your opponent's cards off the top of your opponent's library, once again, there's the trick where when you hit multiple players, you can take multiple cards. So don't think you're capped on 1 a turn with Gonti here. One other I realized I didn't talk about at all with the Most Wanted deck is so we used to get these big thick commanders, these kind of I don't know, credit card thickness ones. That's been happening for a little while now. What we've learned is people just don't use them. They're there. You use them maybe a little bit when you're out of the box, but people don't carry them around with them. So, oops, a little computer noise boop there. Let me make sure my sound is muted. Dell wants to tell me that there are updates ready to install. How exciting. Happens to us all. Even commander designers have to update their computers. Okay, so the one thing that we were doing, decided is, okay, well, if we're not going to do these thick cards because people aren't really enjoying them a ton, or at least they're not really adding a lot, let's do them cool to the commanders. Let's make them look really awesome. So all the commanders get this cool, kind of borderless, full treatment right here, and they look pretty slick. So that when something I keep saying is when you look at what a commander game looks out there in the world, like what it looks like when people play, people are playing all kinds of cool blinged out versions of cards. So let's put a little bit of that in the precons. And so we're doing this here on the face commanders, and it's my hope personally we can do more in the future. We'll see what forms that take. There's a lot of different levers we can pull, but I'm a big fan of it. Starting here, and you have to wait to see what might happen someday. I don't even necessarily know yet. But there's Gonti for you. Felix 5 Boots, this card has a funny story about it. I'm actually going to have a little short I'm working on about this, but basically we wanted to do this for a really long time, and it didn't work in the rules. We kept trying to make this Panharmonicon for Saboteur triggers, and it didn't work. We tried it on Rogue class, and it got killed for rules reasons. Tried it one other place too, but we tried a couple places, and it got killed for rules reasons. And eventually, in Lost Caverns of Ixalan Commander, Chris Mooney made the card Weta, Trainer Prodigy, and it didn't work in the rules either. Now, Chris loved that card so much that they went to rules and talked to them and got the rules changed so that could work. And the small tweak that they made opened up the room for Felix Five Boots to finally come into existence. So Corey went ahead and put it right into this set, and now you all can play your Saboteur doubling deck, which is fun. Also, it's, you know, there are 5 Boots and Sultai colors you can play, so that's pretty cool too. All right, so yeah, here's one thing that steals stuff from the battlefield, but you're stealing artifacts, feels a little more fair. You're taking, you know, Soul Ring, hopefully, because someone got a good start with it. Casting stuff from your opponent's library, or sorry, in exile, your opponent's exile. Costs 2 less to cast. A tricky little other use of this card. It was made for foretell, but is now used for something so much different. Here's a good example. You're casting stuff out of all your opponent's graveyard. Very powerful, but you know, not taking any of their stuff in play. Taking off the top of their library. Taking stuff off the top of their library, taking stuff from their graveyard. So you'll see the kind of the trick we did here was just a lot of taking things that are not mostly on the battlefield. Here's one that does take something that they cast though. It's riff on Spelljack, a card from Judgment that I love. If you watched my Commander hints, I said there was a sly callback to an Odyssey blue rare. This is it. It casts Spelljack. Spelljack is 6 mana to exile their spell, and you can play it. This is a creature that does something sort of in that space. The Smirking Spelljacker. Mind's Dilation. I'll take a thing off the top of your library. Original Gonti. Of course, it's a Gonti deck. You got to have a bit of that going on. Here's a card that not a lot of people know from the recent Innistrad sets. That gives your stuff Menace, and lets when you hit them, you get to take their cards away from them. So lets you Gonti them. We actually call this ability Gontying in design. So that's been our shortcut. Maybe someday we'll have a better keyword for it. But we call it Gontying for now. Brainstealer Dragon. This is a card I made in Baldur's Gate Commander, and now coming all the way back here. Fresh, brand new art for it. We try and un-D&D-ify our cards when we reprint them in Commander decks. And so this is now just a more generic Brainstealer Dragon. Cunning Rhetoric, reprint there. Thieving Amalgam, one's going to steal off the top of your opponent's library. Oops. But plays really nicely because when a creature you control but don't own dies, you drain them for 2. So it works with all the stuff you've taken from them, fits right in. Once again, you're not stealing from anything that's on the battlefield. A Ninja that manifests, I think is fun. It's like a very, very sneaky, it's like, hey, I'm hitting you from nowhere, and then I'm getting a thing you don't know what it is. So I enjoy that kind of mystery. You manifest off their library too, and the treasure token you make, a trick we often do. So sometimes we do the mana washing thing, right? Where like you can, I think that, you know, Gontis will say this, where you can spend mana of any type to cast that spell. We can write that out. One other way we can cheat it is by giving you access to mana of any color. In the case of Orochi's Soul Weaver, it doesn't let you turn the manifest face up with any color mana, but the treasure helps make sure you can pay those costs. So it's a little trick we do sometimes in our design. Oh, cards falling all over the place here. Thieving Varmint. This was another one of my hints about the Commander decks. Gives you 2 mana, which is pretty good. You have to find a way to cast spells that you don't. You have to make sure you get some spells in exile, but it's pretty easy to do. And the Death Touch and Lifelink is surprisingly good at just rattlesnaking your opponent so they don't attack you. We call these rattlesnake cards, where you play them and your opponent doesn't want to hit you because you might trade off. And Death Touch is a very simple form of rattlesnake that's really nice. This is a heck of a board wipe right here. Heartless Conscription. 8 mana, kills off everything, and then you get to cast it. Especially when people are playing things that generate mana, like, I don't know, say there's a Dockside Extortionist on the board, this thing can get really wild. So, yeah, it's a pretty solid board wipe for this deck, and especially as your opponents are playing strong ETBs and stuff, this card can really pop off in satisfying ways. A Nashi reprint. I know Nashi was in the story and didn't end up with a card anywhere. That's just a fact of how, the timing of how things worked out, unfortunately. Would have loved to make a Nashi card if things worked out a little bit differently. Make the other ninja in here a Nashi or what have you. Here's a Savvy Trader. This kind of thing sounds very, I mean, you read it, you're like, great, I know what this card does. There's nothing wild about it. This kind of card, though, you might not expect is a hot debate inside R&D. Now, why is that? Well, green has the ability to just return permanents from your graveyard to your hand. So exiling a permanent card from your graveyard and just saying you can play it for as long as it remains exiled is basically just the same thing as returning it to your hand. Yeah, I know there's small differences. You could get wheeled and not have the card anymore or whatever, right? But for the most part, like most of the time, this is exactly the same text as returning a card to your hand. So if you were to just do that top part, like, people would get a little uppity. They're like, this is just a weird way of writing this that's very hackneyed for your deck. But with the bottom part, well, okay, now there's a reason to do it, right? Because you can't track what the card is that you returned in your hand. So, spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 1 less to cast. All right, well, that makes sense now why you'd be exiling it, because you want to be able to track this thing. So that's a small little thing. I did there's a similar card, I think, in Baldur's Gate, maybe. There's that I made. It's a big green guy. I can't remember the name from the red-green deck. They're like exiles, and it used to be you could play it forever, and then I changed it to just letting you play it through your next turn for similar reasons. Someone in the comments will post it. It's like a 6/5 green creature in the red-green deck that's new. Can't remember the name. Okay, Tower Winder. This is one of the most hotly debated cards, not only internally, but also externally, it seems, from the whole product. Corey had that fun idea of a rattlesnake that found Command Tower, which we all, smiled at. There's so much discussion around this card. It was like, is this an appropriate card to print? Is this going to show up in every commander deck? Will nobody want to put this in their decks? Should this search the graveyard? Should this search the battlefield, right? Because should it just let you bring up your Command Tower if it died somehow? There's a version that's sacked for a while, like Sakura Tribe Elder, to go find Command Tower. Corey even tried it at 1 mana at some point. We tried all these different things, and it was like I said, a pretty hotly contested card internally. And then this is the version we settled on, and when we shipped it, we were curious what people were going to think. And I think what's so interesting is in the real world right now, as these decks are releasing, people are having the same exact debate that we were having as we were working internally on this card. I think I've seen opinions on this card range from everywhere from it'll go in every green deck I make to unplayable. And I am very curious to see how it ends up turning out. My guess is it'll be somewhere in the middle. Some people will play it. It's a fine card. It, fixes your mana, finds Command Tower. Even if you discard your Command Tower or it dies somehow, you sack it in like your, Windgrace deck or Gitrog deck or whatever. You can bring it back, which is nice. But I think it will not. I think it will not become ubiquitous or anything, which is something we're trying to avoid. Oh, one fun fact about this is originally it was, I think we tried for a while, was single green, so 1 mana to cast. And when it died, you found Command Tower, not when it entered the battlefield. And that was a version I pushed back pretty heavily on, because if you play it and then you draw your Command Tower, you feel so bad if your opponent hasn't traded into it yet. So I really pushed to get a 2 mana enters version, and I'm glad we did. And that was a, in my opinion, a good change. Although obviously I asked for it, so I'm incredibly biased in thinking that it was a good change. Here's a card that can steal your opponent's stuff from the battlefield, but you kind of kill it first, so it's not like they were going to have it anyway. And your opponent has the opportunity to kill the hostage taker to take it back. Way to make sure you get through. Of course, with Gaunty, when you hit your opponent's, ways to get through is really important. Takes from their hand. Yeah, okay, that's it's gonna be a little mean. It's a card that gets through. Shadow Mage Infiltrator right here. Some removal spells, Thief of Sanity. Here it is, the card, Villainous Wealth. There's a cool booster fund version in the main set as well, but we knew we had to do Villainous Wealth. This is, as I said, part of the reason for existing here. So, Jeremy Noel, this deck truly is for you. Mimeoplasm also taking your opponent's stuff. Sometimes cards are just like on theme if they don't fit what the deck is doing. Plasm Capture just feels like stealing. So even though it doesn't actually work that well with Gaunty or whatever, it just feels so appropriate for this deck. So sometimes feel does mean a lot. Here's a new card, this Dream Thief's Bandana. When it hits your opponent, you get to Gaunty them. So just start the Gaunting a little bit early, have an equipment around that lets you keep doing it late if your commander is killed, so on. Take their lands. Here's another one of these, the blue-green land from Fallout, reprinted here already, Overflowing Basin. Fallout just came out, but we really wanted to time it up so you guys know we would be willing to reprint these things. Here's Iridescent Bog, same deal. They're not just locked in the Universe Beyond deck. We gotta give them names that could show up anywhere. Slitherblade. It's finally time for a commander, Slitherblade. Not the reprint you would expect, but what turns out with Gaunty, getting to make sure you draw a card every turn, pretty decent. Yeah, so you got some unblockable cards like Whirler Rogue. Here's Triton Shorestalker too, Silano Ledgewalker. Yeah, various random spells. This is a fun one. So with processors, as you exile their cards to Gaunty or whatever, you can process them. So if your opponent has lands that you don't want in exile, or you just ended up with a bunch of cards in exile, you can make stuff out of it. So processing is kind of a fun extra little thing. Sometimes we include cards as like 1 or 2 ofs, just to be like, hey, here's the thing your deck could do. You don't have to do this, but you could do it. And so Void Tenant points you in that direction, and Oblivion Sower, which was I passed already, but it was back there somewhere, is similar, right? You exile a bunch of your opponent's lands. Well, at some point you can put them all into play, which is kind of cool. There's that new art on Sol Ring we talked about before. More ways to get through, some lands. And then we got our tokens and our bounties at the back. So really once again, the art on these is so good. Like, for these bounty cards, don't sleep on this stuff. I want to know about a lot of these characters. They're cool. Okay, that was that deck. Which one should we go to next? Let's hit up the Desert Bloom deck. This is the Desert Discard Lands deck. Now, when Corey was talking to me about making a desert deck, I was like, I don't know about deserts as a theme. And so he's like, well, what if we expanded a little bit? And he had the idea of doing, you know, what about a land sacrifice deck? You have some desert synergies in there. Here's the deck box again. They all come with these. And ended up being a pretty unique kind of take on a lands deck with land sack. Ooh, Abrupt Decay, nice. Happy to get a free one of those here in this deck. Right, you just get this in every box and ride down. Cool. Always feel good when you get a little goodie on top of your commander decks here. All right, so let's crack this thing out. And once again, all plus and plus counters here on the top. Here's a little insert. Let's take another look at this because we looked at all the other ones. See what it has to say in case you want to see what the tips for playing the deck are. Oops, well, I tore it, but that's on me. Got a little aggressive there. Here's some info on Yuma, a little bit of flavor info on Yuma. And then, yeah, some tips about playing the deck. Like I said, if you ever pick up a deck and you're not sure how to play it, this is here for you. I know it's easy to like look at the insert and be like, I'm throwing this away immediately, but we do take time to write this. So, you know, nothing you need to do it by any stretch of the imagination, but just a little helpful thing that exists there for you. Don't feel bad about learning how it's played. One of my favorite things is to grab people's commander decks and play them without knowing anything. I do that all the time at Magic Cons. If you've ever played Magic with me, there's a good chance you've seen me do this. I absolutely love it. But especially if you're like coming in or you're relatively newer, having a little bit of guidance is pretty useful. So, yeah, don't be afraid to read that little thing there. It's a little bit of hidden tech from me to you. Okay, I've successfully mangled that packaging. Very skilled, as you can tell. And here's Yuma, the face commander for this deck. He sacks your lands and then gets reduced to come down cheap late. So if you have a lot of lands in your graveyard, this does apply to the command tax. So you can play them out for a lot cheaper. And there are these 4/2 plant warriors with reach, or a thing that Corey was really keen on. He liked the idea of implementing a bunch of these in this deck, so it's a fun one. And you'll note that Yuma is carrying this little guy, who we'll see right here with Kiri Talented Sprout. This card's playtest name was, I think, Caven, Little Cactus Baby, which is fun. But in a deck that has lots of plants and tree folk, they wanted some kind of plant and tree folk kindred reward here. And in most plays, in this deck, most of the time, the thing you're going to be caring about is getting back a land every turn, which is surprisingly strong. But it does pump up all your plants and tree folk, so you can build a pretty sideways deck with that there if you want. Reprinting, of course, some cool Amonkhet deserts and ways to loop stuff back to the battlefield, stuff like Sun Titan. These cycling lands do double duty, right? Because you can also, it's a great way to get them into your graveyard. We got to finish the cycle of these someday. I hope we get to do that. Scoot Swarm, card players love. It's one of the most popular cards. We had to see the data on like top crafted cards on Magic Arena. I remember when Zendikar came out. This was super popular to craft. People love this one. All right, let's keep. Oh, here's some cards I made. Nesting Dragon and Turn Timber Sower. These are from the Windgrace Lands deck in Commander 2018, which me and Melissa did a whole video about reviewing. It had its ups, it had its downs, but it's always cool to see some cards that I made come back. And when you design Magic for long enough, you get to like throw cards forward to yourself, which is kind of fun. Like, oh, I made that for this weird thing, and now it's here. Here's a card from the Dominaria box toppers that's back. Hazizan, Shaper of Sand, based on Hazizan Tamar, who cares about Sand Warrior tokens. And there's a new card in this deck that makes Sand Warriors as well that we'll get on to. Here's the red-white one of these OTJ lands. Or rather, Fallout lands reprinted in OTJ. You get to see them here for the first time. Decimate. Fun little story on Decimate is okay. Here's a cool one. So I was playing Magic in Houston with some friends, with Family the Gathering, if you know them, a couple other folks, and someone cast Decimate, and they did the thing that I saw happen so many times, which is they didn't have all legal targets. There was only like a creature and a land or an artifact on the battlefield, and they cast it. And I had to tell them, hey, it doesn't work like that. You have to have all your targets for Decimate. And they were so surprised by it, and I've seen this interaction happen so many times. I've seen this happen over and over and over again in the course of this card's existence. I mean, it came out in Odyssey, so I've seen it happen a lot. It's been played in Commander a lot, but you have to have all the targets for it to work, right? It doesn't say up to. And I realized at that moment, like, someone clicked in my head, and I was like, oh, the Commander set I'm working on, Murders at Karlov Manor, actually has Decimate in it. I should go back and ask the editor if we can get reminder text on it to explain this to people. And so I went back and I asked, and Nat did a great job getting it on here. And now I'm glad it can go forward. So that's my little reminder text add to this card. Me just touching up an old card from Odyssey, which is, oh no, over 20 years ago. I can't believe I said that. There's a funny story. It's nothing to do at all with this opening, but I'll tell anyway. Because I was at like a Magic Fest in Vegas before the pandemic, so like 2019 maybe. 2018 was one of those, and they had this cool Odyssey throwback draft, and I was like, oh, sick. So I played in the Odyssey throwback draft, and I drafted a pretty good deck, and I sit down against my round one opponent. He's like a kid or so, he's teenager, and he asks me like, hey, have you ever played this set before? And I was like, oh yeah, like when I was a kid I drafted it, I like remember playing it some, and I asked him if he had ever played it before, and he was like, oh no, I wasn't born when that set came out, and my bones shriveled into dust right at that very moment. Okay, here's the other card that creates Sand Warrior tokens. This is a new one. It's this little catch-up thing. Now, normally white goes to find plains, but this one can go and find a desert too, or I guess just a desert, not a desert also, but this deck has plenty of deserts, so it's kind of a unique catch-up card here. One thing that was notable is as we've made more and more of these white catch-up cards as a way of ramp, one thing we've discovered is they don't really work with each other, because once you've caught up, they stop kind of functioning as well. So we're trying to find other ways for white to ramp, but this is still a good and unique one. Gets you a desert, which is something that not a lot of cards do. So that's kind of a neat take. Embrace the Unknown throws back to Retrace. This card is really fun, always gives you gas to work with, and in a land-themed deck, giving you a new Retrace card makes sense. This one makes all your stuff deserts. Everything is a desert, which I think is pretty fun. It's kind of a unique line of text. I remember seeing this and being like, oh, that's really charming. What else is it going to do? And then, Corey ended up adding in some more stuff to have it be more of a package. But just all your lands are deserts is a fun line. Here's a board sweeper that makes you a bunch of mana, which is certainly very tantalizing. This card had one of my favorite playtest names in the set. I understand why we had to change it, because it's a little too goofy, but it was called Trees Company. Trees Company, because it's making 3 trees. I don't know. I thought it was really funny. So there you go. In fact, this is one of my favorite things in general, when it was a playtest name in the set. So I know for those who have watched these before, I like to put a code word in the middle for you to post in the comments to show that you made it here and you're not just skimming through the video. I'm always curious how many people actually watch the whole thing start to finish and catch all my weird little asides. So if you got here and you see this, type Trees Company into the comments. Find a way to hide it maybe a little bit just to not make it too obvious, but that's tree as in, a tree that's outside. Trees Company. See if you can work that into a sentence. It's a fun one to say. You gotta call this Trees Company when you cast it. It's a great playtest name. Okay, this is a pretty fun one, right? So when you cast it, you get one thing back, which is good. It's like a little Sun Titan or whatever. But the Encore lets you rebuild. These kind of Naya decks can be kind of soft as sweepers. There's not always a ton of card draw in them, and they kind of can run out of gas in the late game. So this Encore ability for 8 mana lets you bring back 3 of these and get back 3 permanents that cost 4 or less, which is a pretty darn big deal. So it's a cool new take. Okay, so Corey wanted to make a creature land to go with all the land theming that they were making here. And so I wanted to make sure it was something... I impressed upon him, like, yeah, we can do this, but it should be something that's for Commander. And so they came back with this, which I'll admit, I was like, this is a little spooky, because if your Commander is Progenitus or whatever, you just get to attack for 10. But it doesn't have Trample or anything, so it's a lot more reasonable. And in general, one thing that we're trying to do is, cheap Commanders are disadvantaged in Commander, right? You can play them earlier, you can replay them with their tax easier. So finding cards that benefit high mana cost Commanders, and also for that matter, only running 1 Commander, although this doesn't do that. Is something that we're actively trying to do. So Cactus Preserve is a nice little nod in that direction, and you'll see more like it, more stuff that cares about high mana cost Commanders in the future. Corey also made like Stinging Study, which draws you cards equal to your Commander's mana value. So we're trying to put some stuff in that space. None of that stuff broke anything. We'll see if Cactus Preserve does. Here's just a big boy. He just comes down, overruns your team, and smashes. Crater Hoof Behemoth Light, but you can cast it for 1 mana sometimes. So, and it's got a great name, Rumbleweed. What's not to love? Lands that sack themselves, particularly good here, of course, with the land theming. Cards that put lands in your graveyard. Just, you know, cards that care about when you sack lands, all that kind of stuff. Discarding lands. Croson Verge, a classic. Love that card. Bitter Reunion, just another way to discard stuff. Also giving yourself haste, very relevant with a lot of the stuff going on here. This is one great one to sack. This is like a funny little Amonkhet throw forward, right? You sack this land, you get a 2/2 zombie for your troubles. Unholy Heat, little modern action going on right here. And there's another Requisition Raid. We saw this one previously, but this is just for 3 mana killing off an artifact and enchantment. You know, Hull Breach has seen a lot of play in Commander, and this one does too. Ramps you a bit there. Bunch of deserts, bunch of new deserts here. Here's a fun one to talk about. This is a reprint from the Who precons. So this is a Universes Within version of this card. Well, I guess not technically Universes Within because it doesn't have, like, you know, whatever a name like those ones do, or with SLX or something. But anyway, details don't matter. What's cool is just, yeah, the cards with generic names from Universe Beyond Precon are really easy to reprint. We can find ways to reprint the other ones too, but this is one that fit this deck really well, and Corey grabbed it from Who. It's got a bunch of deserts, of course. Scare Killer to get stuff back. Nantuko Cultivator, all the reprint. Bunch of lands. You gotta make sure you have lands to sacrifice. Here's a bunch of tokens. There's those 4/2 plant warriors there's so much about. There's that dragon egg. And then the bounties. Lord Frajal, Pach, Fleeting Flitcher, and Veribest Hannaford. This card art is stunning, by the way. Sid Hearth absolutely knocked it out of the park. Did not need to go this hard on a bounty. It's pretty cool. Okay, one deck left to go. Let's get into Quick Draw, which is a little more typical, but one of my favorites. One of the things that we always try and do is try and make one of the decks something that's like a theme that we know people love. That's very like, oh, yeah, I like Magic. I played themes before. Go back and grab this. And this is a Spellslinger deck, but a little different than what you've seen before, as I'll cover as we go through it. Also, haven't talked about this, but there are these fun little phrases that the creative team puts at the bottom of each deck in the pull tab, little secret phrases. So this is the Master Blaster Spellcaster, another thing that's just fun to say, frankly. All right, set this over here to the side. Let's crack open our Collector Booster. See if we can beat the Abrupt Decay that we already got. All right, what's in this one? We got, a foil Wily Duke. That's cool. And then another Back for More. Wow, I guess Back for More is back for more, as it were. Okay, more +1/+1 counters hanging out right here. And here's the insert for this deck. Here's all about Stella Lee, who is quite strong. I've actually heard that the competitive commander is looking at playing this card. So pretty easy to do my infinite combos with it, I guess. And here's some info about playing the deck. You got to know that it starts with It's High Noon. So if it's High Noon, you got to play this deck. Come on. All right. So yeah. So this is a Spellslinger deck. It's a little different than ones you've seen before, right? Plot gives it a little bit of different play. You get to set it for one big turn. And in a way, I mean, I wouldn't call it this necessarily, but it's sort of like a Storm deck. It's got a bunch of new Storm cards. It's got like it's got one card that grants your stuff Storm, one new card with the Storm ability. It wants you to play a bunch of things in a single turn. And while you're not going to like Storm combo someone in a single turn with this deck, like you might in, I don't know, Legacy or whatever, it still kind of has that vibe of, okay, I'm doing a bunch of things in one turn, got a big flurry. Because we wanted that Spellslinger vibe, right? We wanted the person that kind of walks in and, you know, is twirling their weapon as like bam, 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 right? That's where this came from. And so he wants you to cast 2 spells in a turn for this. Much easier to do when you're plotting. And if you cast 3 spells, you get to copy one of your instants or sorceries. And once again, notably, if you have like a spell that untaps something and does something else, like untap a creature, draw a card, this just goes infinite, right? So any number of those spells you can go infinite with this card with. So pretty easy to call out your infinite combos. And here's the backup commander, Eris, Roar of the Storm. Wants you to play a bunch of different mana value instants and sorceries. When you cast your second each turn, you get this 4/4 dragon. It'll also show up later. You'll see that. All right, of course, we got some Strixhaven stuff in here. Now, Corey made the blue-red deck in Strixhaven as well, so they're no stranger to making blue-red spell-based decks. A lot of your common suspects. You've got Talrand, sure. Archmage Emeritus, you know, of course. Here's a new card, Thunderclap Drake. This card is a 2-mana 2-1 that reduces all your spells, so it's already pretty exciting, right? It's like, what's that card? The Goblin Electromancer. but it flies as well, which is pretty nice. It has this ability too to copy your spells. I think originally this was just like 3 mana to copy a spell, and it was decided that that was just like looked too egregious compared to a bunch of other just normal Magic cards we've made. So let's key it into Commander somehow. Let's make this feel more like a Commander design. One thing we're always pushing on is, why is this card not just a standard card, right? Why is it not just in a standard set? And making things focus on Commander, literally call out Commander, are one way to do that. And so, okay, we took off the just copy a spell on it and put on this Commander text, which gives you a bigger dream, which is exciting. It's got a much bigger dream attached to it. And it also helps make it look much more like a Commander card. Here's a really fun one, Lock and Load. This one lets you have your big stormy turn, right? So you plot this thing over to the side, and once you've cast 2 other spells in a turn, you fire this thing off, draw 3 cards. It just feels really cool. Sort of like this card in Who that I made with Foretell as well. Forger's Foundry. So I love when we make 3 mana rocks you want to put in your deck. And this is a pretty neat one for this strategy, where it stores all your small spells under this that you cast with it. And then you get to cast them all again later. Which is lets you have a big storm turn, right? Imagine you get 3 or 4 cantrips under this. You tap 5 mana, you cast all of them, and then you flip over, say, Lock and Load, and draw 5 or 6 cards, or one of your storm spells in here. It's pretty cool to have a big turn. I like this card a lot. Finale of the Revelation, a nice reprint. Curse this one again. Mizzix Mastery, another great way to cast a bunch of spells out of your graveyard. Chaos Warp. Here's a new one. Giving a spell Storm, what could go wrong? We basically saw this with Thousand Year Storm in Guilds of Ravnica. What could go wrong with this? It's probably fine, right? So, you can cast this thing and then give it Storm and give a spell Storm. Now, notably, one little trick here, it says if you cast it, so you can't like blink it or something like that to, cheat the mana too much, but you don't have to cast it for its mana cost. So if you, for example, have found a way to foretell this and you get to play it for cheaper, find a way to plot this and you play it for cheaper, or whatever, if you find some way to skirt the cost, if you suspend this with Jorah or whatever, and then it comes into play, you skirt that cost and can cast your big devastating spell with Storm. So something to consider, because Storm count will already be 1 by virtue of casting this card. So Pyretic Charge. One thing with these decks, especially these blue-red spell-based ones, is we're always like, okay, how can they close out the game, especially if you're newer and you're not as like adept at finessing like all the pieces of value you have. So sometimes just a way to pump your creatures and deal with your opponent is nice. Also, a wheel that you can plot and then cast when you're out of cards and have all your mana untapped is pretty slick. There's a Time Twister in the main set that is built with kind of a similar vibe. Okay, so Smoldering Stagecoach, when it attacks, you give your next instant and sorcery Cascade. My fun fact about this card, and I kept giving Corey feedback, hey, this isn't obvious, but his argument back was, yeah, but it's sweet. And I was like, okay, can't argue with that, is that this gives your next instant and sorcery Cascade. So if you cast an instant or a sorcery, and you cascade into the other type, let's say you play an instant and cascade into a sorcery, that sorcery will also have Cascade. So you can potentially double up with this ability, which is pretty slick for this vehicle. Well worth attacking with. Here's that 4/4 red dragon elemental creature with flying and prowess on a brand new Storm card. Move over, empty the Warrens. We got something much bigger for you here. Who needs a bunch of piddly goblins when you can make a bunch of big dragon elementals with flying? Rousing Refrain. Very solid card for this deck, giving you Suspend. You get a bunch of mana off of it, and then because you didn't cast any mana to play it, it already ups your Storm count by 1. So that's pretty cool. It's to cast a bunch of stuff out of your graveyard, cast out of your graveyard. So you'll see a lot of stuff like that. We've got Niv Mizzet here, Kaza. Shark Typhoon. If you're casting a lot of non-creature spells, this is a great one to have. I love this card so much. You can always cycle it away to get a creature if you need. As a big Decree of Justice fan, this card speaks to me. And when you play it out, don't forget you can just play this card. And a lot of standard players are like, oh yeah, you cycle it, and then you just move on with your life. But casting this spell can be very, very hard to deal with. Another way to cast a bunch of spells in a turn, Epic Experiment. It doesn't always work out the way you want. You're never really sure how it's going to work, but it's really sweet when it happens. Leyline Dowser. So here's another new card. You get to mill a card, then bring back an instant or sorcery if you hit it. But you can keep tapping your legends to go at this over and over. So hopefully you find one that you're looking for. Easy way to both load up your graveyard for all the cards that care about spells in your graveyard, and also, draw some cards every now and then. All right, here are these lands. Here's the Blue-Red Ferris Lake, by the way. Another one of those ones from Fallout, reprinted here. Bunch of stuff you would expect. Cantrips, cheap spells, stuff to just get your spell slinger vibes going. This guy gets big fast, right? Terramander. Easy to make this guy a 5/5 flyer, which is kind of cool. Vandal Blast is a pretty mean card. We don't always include this in precons, but there wasn't like a dedicated artifact themed deck. There is a treasure deck, and blowing up all the treasures is a pretty noble thing to do. So that's cool. Yeah, and it also costs 1 mana, so it's an easy thing to fire off. This card generates mana off the treasures, generates mana, so really has a kind of stormy feel to it. Here's some new art for Gutter Snipe. I don't think I've seen this one before, so just calling that out. That's kind of fun. Yeah, Cascade, great in this deck. Goblin Electromancer, all these like cantrips. Just make my heart sing. I love Storm decks, so it's right up my alley here. Right up my alley. All right. Go through all these. We've got our tokens. And at the very end, here's the dragon token art, by the way. I should mention, these are all double-sided, by the way. All these tokens are double-sided in these decks. So here's these guys, too. Risa Blades Lee, Sleepy Sabka, and Miran Tillis Jr. Like I said, come back later in the week. I've got a whole video about the bounties for you to check out. All right, well, that was me going through all of the commander decks. Which one would you want to buy the most? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll be curious to know which one you're grabbing, what you're most excited about, any stories here that resonated with you. I know you can watch a lot of people open up commander decks in a lot of different places, play with them and so on, but I hope that taking kind of the slow approach and telling stories is something that you find fun. So let me know if any of these stories you particularly enjoyed, and I might have some more like I can tell in the future. In the meantime, though, go out, have fun, enjoy Outlaws of Thunder Junction Commander, and I'll talk with you again soon, in a couple days when I tell you all about the Bounty minigame. Have fun out there, and remember, everybody, you got this.